Satoru Gojo. Let us review and see if you could have ever won this battle. What's up, guys? Once again, here we are to do a quick... Is that a lie? It's probably a lie. But a quick breakdown and discussion of all the points where Gojo Satoru could have beaten Ryomen Sukuna. If he could have even beaten Ryomen Sukuna at all. Maybe I'm going to go through all these points and have to explain why ultimately, no matter what, no matter who, no matter where, no matter why, no matter any way, shape, or form, it only just wasn't in the cards for the strongest sorcerer of the modern day to defeat the strongest sorcerer in history, Ryomen Sukuna. But obviously we got a lot to talk about. We got around like 14 or 15 different chapters to discuss real quick over this hypothetical battle that may have began in the demon-infested Shinjuku. So let's not waste any more time and let's hop right into it. Editing me, ready, 3, 2, 1, go. What's up, guys? I have a pencil here. Fun fact, I have it on me, and I keep it on me at all times. Another fun fact, Sukuna didn't have it on him, and he didn't keep it on him at all times. But the moment he got it on him, whoo! And that's why Satoru Gojo is now gone. And it naturally led to a certain question, especially with 236 coming out and having Gojo directly say that he isn't actually sure if he could have ever beaten Sukuna, because Sukuna was holding back, this, that, and the other, and he may have not even been able to beat Sukuna if he had the 10 shadows or not. All that wonderful Gojo glaze. The question was naturally raised within the community, well, that's really the case. Was there ever really a shot? Was there ever really any way, shape, or form that Gojo could have won? And personally, I started to wonder that too. So I wanted to go through, before I made other videos that will follow up on this video, are there any moments within the battle where Gojo Satoru could have actually won? Where the "nah, I'd win" was actually valid and not Gojo just lying straight through his teeth? And we have a couple points in the battle I want to discuss, and a couple points that my friends have brought up to me that I want to bring up and say why they may or may not work as Gojo win cons or Gojo wins, or maybe Sukuna would come up with something. There are a couple different factors that I want to cover, so let's not waste any more time and let's hop right into it. Now, you may be wondering, wait a minute, Pencil. You can't fool me. You can't fool me, buckaroo. I know my JJK. That's not even the start. This chapter, this panel right here, this isn't even the Gojo versus Sukuna fight. And you're right. Legally speaking, you're correct. If you were to go to the wiki right now, I assume the Gojo versus Sukuna section would be spanning a different span of chapters. 221 would not be included. But I do want to just give this a highlight because it's something my friend explicitly told me to mention. I made a separate video on what if Gojo did do a certain something here, but you can have that whole video to check out in depth. But this is just a win con, or at least a time where he could have won, that I do want to bring up. Yeah, in 221, I'm a genuine believer. I'm a genuine believer. Don't get me wrong. I could be absolutely incorrect. Feel free to correct me. But I believe, from the bottom of my heart, that Satoru Gojo could have won if he decided to engage Ryomen Sukuna right in this moment. Mainly because Sukuna was not at full power. Not at full power. Now, don't get me wrong. I know there are like 15 bajillion different debates on what the fingers do for him. And I was talking with a friend about this, and they even argued that, well, technically, this may actually still be 20-finger Sukuna, right? Like, maybe he just ate the fingers already. Notably, Satoru did not get released immediately, and Sukuna was kind of just wandering about a while after defeating Yorozu. Maybe he had eaten the fingers. The only reason I'm a little bit hesitant to believe that, and why I still believe this is actually 15-finger Sukuna, is because of the next chapter, 222, where we see that Sukuna actually hasn't consumed the fingers yet. Strangely enough, this does not have the traditional black paneling of flashback chapters, meaning this chapter takes place sequentially after the point of this conflict that is highlighted within 221. And obviously another thing that leads into that, which was just a quick correction I want to bring up, was the fact that Ryomen very specifically mentions at this point the hit they took from Satoru, meaning that this point where Sukuna is consuming the last couple fingers and ultimately the mummy is a point that takes place after Satoru's resurrection or reveal or revival or freedom. Regardless of any of that, this is 15-finger Sukuna. Now, for common things that are against this and why people think it was a smart idea for Gojo to not engage right here, right now, they mainly go to the fact that Kenjaku and Ryomen are still there, and they could get in the way. My only rebuttal to that, my only thingamajig that I find completely wrong about this, and let me explain real quick. This is me removing any plot, removing any character, removing anything like that. This is just me looking for ways for Satoru to win based on his current ability kit, based on the matchup that is established at the time, the particular matchup being Gojo versus Sukuna. At this point, regardless of what you think the fingers do, if you think the fingers are just raw cursed energy amount, if you think the fingers hold techniques, if you think the fingers are fractions of his literal power and his literal soul, all that, this Sukuna is definitively weaker than 20 finger. Whether it be in cursed energy reserves, whether it be in technique number, whether it be in a combination of all the above. So ultimately, a Gojo Satoru that was able to go relative with a 20 finger Sukuna would do better against 15 finger, just verbatim. So this is an easy win. This is an easy win. Why Gojo didn't do it? I've heard multiple different reasons. He didn't have too much information. Maybe he was too dangerous. This, that. He's caught off guard by the fact that Megami is in Sukuna. He plays it off here. You can very specifically see, you've changed since I've been gone, Megami. You can very specifically see that he plays it off a bit, but like, obviously this is a little concerning. But here's one of the biggest reasons why I don't think Ryomen and kenjaku necessarily matter all too much. Here's Ryomen getting one-tapped. One tap so badly that Sukuna doesn't even try to catch him. Like, legitimately, I don't think Ryomen is a problem. Ryomen is actually just defeated by this impact alone. We don't get to see what happens immediately after 221, after the, nah, I'd win panel. We don't get to see what happens after that, but Ryomen was a non-factor. And considering kenjaku, as you can see very earlier on in this chapter, is shaking in his booties at the sheer idea of fighting Satoru Gojo, I think if anything, he would run. He would run. He would run. He would not engage in the battle because he knows that he would be cooked by the 6-size and limitless wielder Satoru Gojo. So kenjaku and Ryomen are not factors. And this literally is just Gojo versus a weaker Sukuna. Presumably, one Satoru Gojo that is not just stronger, but, well, admittedly, stronger is a question here whether or not you think Gojo is still fatigued from the Shibuya incident or not, based on the lack of physical time flowing within the prison realm, even though he's shown moving there. Regardless of whatever you think happened with that, this Gojo would be doing a lot better than he did against 20 finger. And depending on how you interpret the Battle of Gojo versus Sukuna, especially in its latter half, when domains were gone, and even when domains were a part of the fight, 20 finger was at least Meguna. We don't know about how True Form would perform. If you think they have the exact same stats, it's just that True Form has the 4 extra arms and the 2 mouths, then physically, stats-wise, with the usage of blue and his raw physical abilities, Gojo was outdoing Sukuna. I don't think it's too controversial an idea to say that this Gojo, fresh out the prison realm, with no stamina loss, would do better against this 15-finger Meguna and most likely win. However, I will admit there still is the possibility that he gets Maharada. If Gojo's still in character here, you go in the idea he has less information, maybe he's not prepared to hit Megami as much as he is after the month time skip, then maybe he could still lose. But in my opinion, this is a pretty solid win point for Satoru Gojo in the battle against Ryomen Sukuna. So that's one point where he could have won. Admittedly, that's not the main battle though, and you're probably here for the main battle. So let's hop into the next major point where Satoru could have won. This moment right here, where he launched off the 200%, the beefy, girthy, juicy, scrumdiddlyumptious hollow purple from the other side of Mississippi. This fellow right here, one of my favorite panels of Satoru in the entire series, and one of my, oh, admittedly not one of my favorite panels of Sukuna, but still a rather good panel of Sukuna, which leads to a very specific outcome where Satoru Gojo could have won so easily, and I'm gonna explain why. You see this very specific scenario. Satoru appears directly in front of Sukuna, while Sukuna is currently missing a hand. Now, you may be wondering, Pencil, what you talking about, Bucko? How does this automatically lead to a win con? This is just Sukuna versus Go. Fun fact, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't look too hard in this, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But Sukuna, whether it be through Megami's body or whether it be through Itadori's body, has never witnessed Simple Domain. He never has. Think of all the fights that Yuji has been in. The only time you could argue maybe he perceived it out the corner of his eye was when it was Yuji and Todo versus Mahito. But even then, we very specifically see in that instant, Todo reacted after Yuji did, and Yuji had already sprinted ahead, meaning he likely wasn't looking back at Todo and getting all the specifics of Simple Domain. If you could even use Simple Domain with one hand. And the reason I mention this is because Satoru Gojo has a very unique perk that's kind of underrated in terms of his domain. It's a one-hand domain. Morio Kurusu, or Unlimited Void, is in fact a one-hand domain. one that he can pop out pretty instantaneously, as we see later on in this very fight. So you may have a decent idea of what I think the win count is here. Sukuna's missing a hand. His domain and any domain counters he may have access to, such as Simple Domain or Hollow Wicker Basket, or even Falling Blossom Motion, if he for some reason knows that, which he definitely shouldn't, but let's say he does, all of that is absolutely and indubitably irrelevant because it's literally impossible to access because he is missing a hand. So all that Satoru needed to do to win here was just go Byoki Tenkai Murio Kurusu, and then that'd be it. That would literally be it. And you may be wondering, well, wait a minute, wouldn't Mahoraga just pop out? If it did, it would also get hit and insta-lose. Because remember, Mahoraga did not adapt quickly to Unlimited Void. It took multiple, about 5 of them bad boys for Mahoraga to adapt after Megami took a whole bunch of Unlimited Void punishment, and Gojo and Sukuna had a bunch of battle in between. So right here, right now, at the start of the battle, where Sukuna is missing a whole big old hand, and Satoru is purely fresh, no brain damage, no nothing, he literally could have opened Unlimited Void right here in the battle with Gojo. None of Sukuna's domain counters are available to him when he's missing a hand. Whether you think it's Hollow Wicker Basket, he's going to do something like that, you need 2 hands for that, at least based on how Reggie does it and how Kashimo seems to go actively attempt to do it. For Symbol Domain, you do need to hit a squat, but then again, it seems like that's a 2-handed motion, which Sukuna cannot do with 2 hands. And the other major thing is that he's never seen it. At least from what I know. Maybe I'm missing a very specific fight, but I'm trying to blink through all the different instances where Sukuna would have been present. Yuji never learned it. Megami never learned it. Megami learned his own domain, but once again, Megami's domain is a 2-handed domain, so that wouldn't work. Yeah, I literally don't think there's any example. The only thing you could hypothetically argue that Sukuna has seen that's the domain counter outside of his own domain is Hollow Wicker Basket from Megami's memories of battling Reggie. So at this point, unless it's revealed off screen or later that Yuji and Megami learned Soul Domain sometime when Sukuna was possessing them, or before when Sukuna was possessing them, he wouldn't have that. If that would even work, once again, with 1 hand, which it may not. So that means that Gojo could have won right here, specifically in the way he wanted to, by the way. Realize that Satoru, well, I don't believe he was holding back stats or anything like that. He was holding back in lethality, maybe. Because there's no reason he shouldn't just drop another Hollow Purple right here, right now. Sure, Sukuna's right in front of him. It has a whole bunch of charge time. He literally has the infinity. Nothing Sukuna could have done could have gone through it. He could have just spammed purple here if he really wanted to. Heck, we see that later on he's able to damage Sukuna with a red. He could have just kept pressing him with a bang, 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 bang. But he very specifically doesn't do that. But what does Satoru Gojo do here instead? He talks about how Sukuna's the challenger here. AKA he wastes time. Instead of going like this, talking about, hey, you're the challenger here, should have gone like this, and like, Murio Kurusu. And then the battle will be over. And I literally don't see a way for Sukuna to be saved in that moment. Every other pretense where Sukuna is saved from Unlimited Void very specifically comes from when, well, Mahoraga's already adapted. Because he ate like 5 of them bad boys for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So of course he'd be adapted to that. Say Mahoraga's in the shadows here, or Mahoraga's wheel is spinning above Megami's soul right now. Sukuna, Megami, and Mahoraga would be getting the fresh juice. Straight from the orange juice. All the pulp would be in there and everything. And before Sukuna could even consider doing something fancy about it, he would be stuck thinking about air. 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 Air, like he would literally be frozen. Bro would be glitching live on air. So this is also just a very easy point where Satoru could have won, but once again, whether it be in character stupidity or just plot, he doesn't. Honestly, the way you fix this and the way you avoid this is just don't have Sukuna's arms get blown. Have him dodge it or something, because then you could write that off. Oh, okay, that's why Gojo didn't immediately open his domain. But considering he's very willing to open domain, yeah, this was rather foolish. Another rather foolish point where I believe that Satoru could have won, this entire little exchange here, this entire little battle that we see, him playing patty cake with Sukuna is nice, and it fits in character. Once again, we ain't talking about in character. We're talking about Gojo trying to win. The fact that he doesn't just sit here and charge a purple, or charge a mega blue, or charge a mega red. He just starts tossing Sukuna around like this. So really, this may be a usage of a red here. Dog, need I remind you, unless it's domain, nothing Sukuna has is working. Nothing. One of the biggest things he brings up later is, oh, Sukuna's charge time. But actually, throughout the entire fight, until Maharaga and Ahito are brought into the scenario where they could maybe, well, actually, no, very specifically, Maharaga could come in with that, once again, adapted blade and start tapping him. At any moment, unless Sukuna opened domain, he could start hitting the hand signs. He could start doing the chants. He could just charge a purple right in Sukuna's face. And what's Sukuna going to do other than run? And remember, Gojo Satoru is the wielder of the six eyes. Let me see if I can find an image of this man's beautiful eyes. Look at them right here. Nothing has energy cost. Bro has unlimited mana. Bro is like Shadow the Hedgehog. He's got the chaos and he's got the hero meter full. Somehow at the same time, bro is unlimited energy. Unlimited. Bow, wow. Like quite literally. So there's no reason why he shouldn't just be charging purple right here. Especially since, once again, in a similar vein to how we see he's willing to use Unlimited Void later, forget any of the whole stuff about saving Megami. Bro was more than ready to cook his son right there on the griddle with an Unlimited Hollow Purple later on in this very fight. So if we're just talking about Gojo winning, him standing there in charge of purple should have been a thing. But I can understand that. That one's very, very flimsy. And I'm not even going to really chalk it up all too much. I'm going to chalk that one up to the game. Because realistically, him charging purple could have been a risk. Sukuna could have opened domain. If only Satoru Gojo had a very specific ability that would allow him to simply clap his hands together and leave the domain. We're going to talk about that in a second. But this is admittedly a time where the two are going relative. They're enjoying themselves. And thusly, maybe Satoru doesn't think about launching a purple here or there, using his techniques all too much outside of basic telekinesis and stuff like that. So, you know, we can, once again, we can chop this one up to the game. Let's move on to chapter 225, where we talk about Satoru's first leap into idiocy. Now, here's my thing. It's highly questionable whether or not someone told Gojo about the nature of Sukuna's domain. It's highly questionable whether or not Gojo reviewed the Carfax of the Shibuya incident and realized that Sukuna had a barrierless domain. All of that is very, very questionable. Don't get me wrong. So I will let this one slide. Realistically, Gojo should have known better. I'm legit not even gonna chalk it up to anything, but Gojo should have known better that this domain was barrierless and this would be a hard counter to his own domain, and thusly he shouldn't have engaged in this domain battle. He shouldn't have. He really shouldn't have. And the reason I say that is because if he activates his domain at the same time, he would immediately go into a domain clash where both of the sure hits are canceled out within the barriers of Gojo's own domain. But since he should be smarter than this, once again, the strongest sorcerer of the modern day should have a little bit more brain power than this. Going into a domain clash with someone who has an open barrier domain that very specifically overrides your own by the nature of its properties as an open barrier domain is foolish. Thus, late Broski should have not have played that card. Not this soon. Especially considering there's no real reason to. Because once again, I'm going to bring it up here. I mentioned it a second ago. Now that I've had domains properly explained to me, they don't actually shut down techniques or anything. The only reason they work through infinity is because they are a defined sure hit. Now that I know that, there was never a reason for Gojo to stay there. Not a one. Not a fraction of a reason. There's literally no reason at all for him to not just leave. Leave in charge of purple. Leave in charge of blue. Leave and just drop blues and reds or whatever. Because legitimately, you got to remember, Satoru Gojo's win con here, what he's actually looking for is to incapacitate Sukuna. Sukuna's win con's a lot easier than Gojo's. He simply just wants to... And bada bing, bada boom, there is no more Gojo. That's his main goal. But Gojo very specifically wants to have Meguna incapacitated so he can do something to save Megami. So entering a domain clash with him, well, in theory, is a good idea because, oh, well, technically, if he hits him with a limited void, then that's great. And fantastic. Hits an open barrier domain, Satoru. So engaging in domain battle here is foolish. For a win con in this scenario, once again, I don't think it's viable for this chapter. This chapter is I know this is highly contradictory as a certified, licensed, registered, and honestly well-trained yapper myself. But this fight is a whole bunch of yapping to lead to the domain clash. So I will give Gojo this. He was kind of just dumb here. This isn't necessarily a win con scenario. There's nothing you could have done in particular other than like maybe just leave and not activate his domain. But that's not an automatic win con. And that's a way to work around Sukuna's domain. And, you know, once again, going back to the character and plot stuff, Gojo's too prideful to do what would be the more intelligent thing in that scenario and just leave, just dip, just vanish. That would be the logical thing to do. But does this look like the face of a logical man to you? I cannot find a single image of his face. Does this look like the face of a logical man? Of course it isn't. Bro was a certified, licensed, and registered dumb bubblegum stupid head. But of course, we have this next chapter where we get a little more interesting on a hypothetical win con for Gojo. So, admittedly, this chapter also is a little bit more chaotic in its execution because of Gojo's initial state here of not having access to his curse technique. In this back half of the chapter, he could do nothing. He could do nothing but essentially fight to survive. You can argue he could try to run, but we literally see him try to run, and Sukuna's like, hey, bucko, let's not do this. But then, once again, Satoru starts actually going relative with him a bit and fighting against Sukuna. But of course, Satoru's at a disadvantage because Sukuna has the domain buff, Gojo is without his technique, all that bad stuff. And then we see Gojo activate Simple Domain. Now, admittedly, this is another time to just run. But that's, once again, a different kind of video for a different kind of time. I just want to point out here, in this chapter in particular, the moment he had Sukuna in this very specific grapple, he didn't have to do what he did here in order to get a win con on him. Realistically, and now this is something that's highly theoretical. This is super duper theoretical. But note how he has Sukuna positioned here and where he sends Sukuna. He sends Sukuna back into Malevolent Shrine as he begins his own healing process. Hypothetically, if he had attacked Sukuna from a different angle or even shot Sukuna past his shrine, he could have knocked Sukuna out of his shrine while his shrine was still active, while his technique was still being given to the shrine, and while Sukuna's caught off guard and battle damaged here, then opened his domain. Because the question is, can Sukuna open multiple? Can he open 2? And would the sure hit of Unlimited Void, if not activated at the exact same second, would the sure hit of Unlimited Void override any of Sukuna's actions? Because once again, at this point, Maharago would not be adapted to Unlimited Void, or at least not adapted well enough to immediately come in and pop it. Because once again, it's only experienced 1. Megami Soul's only experienced 1 for a very limited period of time before Gojo's domain ended up shattering. So thusly, the hypothetical win con here is Gojo either staying in the exact same position and aiming a bit more to the left or aiming a bit more to the right, and then immediately chasing Sukuna down and hitting him with a Unlimited Void while the initial Malevolent Shrine is still active, while Sukuna needs to recover. Because we know when Sukuna needs to recover, we see this later on in the battle, he cannot activate Malevolent Shrine as quickly as he would like to. Just a fraction of a second's delay is going to cause him to not deal all too well with Unlimited Void. This is another hypothetical win con right here, though it's only very specifically at the end of the chapter, and it requires Gojo to do very specific angling. This isn't like the earlier win cons where he could probably just bully a 15-finger Sukuna, or another earlier win con where he could simply open Unlimited Void round start while Sukuna has no specific counter. Sukuna's hands are still intact here. It just comes down to a question of whether or not you believe that Sukuna could open a second Malevolent Shrine while the first one's still active, or deactivate the initial Malevolent Shrine before activating a second one, all in the time period before Gojo either rushes him with a blue amp speed or simply teleports over and opens Unlimited Void. If you think that all can happen within the time period that Gojo would need to travel over to a Sukuna that's knocked out of his barrier's range, his open barrier domain's range, and get Unlimited Void, then win con doesn't work. That's fine. He would deactivate and then they would just go into another domain battle. But if you think that it's impossible for him to do that quickly before Satoru could simply appear and open Unlimited Void again, it's another win con that appears right here. And here's the thing. I know someone, when I brought this idea up to my friend, they were like, well, technically, legally speaking, if we're being absolutely correct here, it's literally impossible for Gojo to do anything in this very specific scenario because Malevolent Shrine would still be active. Yeah, but look at the limited range of Malevolent Shrine here. Just because Sukuna was knocked into it did not deactivate the range of the technique. In fact, we see that Gojo even asked Sukuna after healing, after stepping out of the range of the initial Malevolent Shrine, you can go bigger than this, right? So, initially, Sukuna, maybe in an attempt to conserve cursed energy, or just because he didn't feel like it or anything, he didn't go with maximum range. So, Gojo would not have too far of a travel distance to cover from this point in chapter 225, or no, 226, to this point in chapter 227. He easily could have knocked Sukuna right past the shrine, immediately rushed up on him, and opened Unlimited Void. That's simple. And that would be another win con. So, again, Megami would be paralyzed. You may be able to argue you may be able to argue that Mahoraga would immediately come out. But the thing there is, even if Mahoraga comes out, not only would he not necessarily be adapted to the Limitless yet, so Gojo could simply hit him with a full power red, because notably Gojo's output does not drop at this point, and we know a regular basic red would be enough to one-shot Mahoraga, if Maharaga's not adapted to anything yet. But also Mahoraga, even if that is, a lot of people theorize, since we never really get an explanation, the wheel is sort of on an auto-timer thing. If Sukuna's brain or whatever his body is ever deactivated or in a state that is vulnerable, Mahoraga will immediately come out and respond. That's what a lot of people theorize, since Gege never tells us how that worked, how the falling of the wheel or the chant that wasn't made in a later chapter allows Mahoraga to come out and do its darn thing. Even if it were to come out now, it would not have adapted well enough to Unlimited Void to immediately pierce it. It would likely be stalled at least long enough for Gojo to hit it with a red, while Sukuna is still getting hit by the effects of Unlimited Void. And also Sukuna would be paralyzed and would allow for Gojo to do his thing of ripping out all of Sukuna's vital organs in order to make sure that he can hypothetically save Megami, as long as Sukuna himself is cooked. So that's another hypothetical win con just based on this. This one is very, very specific though. I would put this, out of the 3 win cons I brought up so far, of fighting 15 finger to opening Unlimited Void, round start while Sukuna is still missing a hand, all the way down to this one, I would put this one at the bottom, because it requires a lot of high level thought in a very short period of time, and would require very quickly combo moving and trying to abuse Sukuna's lack of awareness very, very quickly. Once again, this is another point where Gojo goads Sukuna instead of taking action, which is quite foolish. Once again, I'm disregarding character. I'm disregarding plot. I'm trying to bring up all the points where Satoru Gojo could have won. And then we get into another domain barrier clash. Now, admittedly, this is foolish. I wouldn't have done this if I was Satoru Gojo, but I simply cannot argue that I'm smarter than Satoru Gojo. I'll make my own video talking about other ways that I would have tried to beat Sukuna if I was Satoru, but very specifically within this, going for a domain battle within this chapter doesn't necessarily leave Gojo with many ways to beat Sukuna. And it leads to a kind of neutral scenario where Gojo decides to evolve in a different way. I will admit, there's no clear win con that's presented right here in chapter 227. There just isn't one, at least after the start of the chapter going into the rest of it. Since he decided to enter that second domain clash, there's nothing you can really argue for it. Sure, he's able to restore his technique very quickly and start his whole brain damage process, but ultimately that doesn't leave anything, because he's very consistently trying to go into domain battles, which isn't necessarily the smartest thing to do, but you can't expect him to charge purple when Sukuna can just open domain, or actually just keep his same domain open. You can't expect him to start firing reds and blues when he's still getting sliced up. So there's no clear win con for 227 outside of the very start of the chapter if very specific conditions are met at the end of 226. Then another case of admittedly a little bit of weirdness is this chapter right here, where the two go a little bit buku bonkers, if you will, inside their domain clashes, with Gojo's alteration of the domain using his experience from the prison realm and compressing himself like this. This leads to a very rare scenario where Sukuna ends up getting pulverized here. And we see that, once again, this just comes down to Gojo's very specific inactivity here. There's no, well, here's the thing, right? Gojo's technique seems to be shut down at this point because both of their, but actually, is it though? Hold on, let me double check this one. This one I want to double check before I make the statement I was going to make. I want to see real quick. Sensei! Huh? Malevolent Shrine. Collapses. Whoa, Gojo, 2 things happen simultaneously. Sukuna destroyed Gojo's domain from the outside, and Gojo's damaged Sukuna enough that he couldn't maintain his domain. Okay, so this is where both of their techniques are shut down. So this is another chapter that just doesn't have a win con. I was going to make a certain statement here, but neither of them, well, Gojo doesn't have an immediate win con that isn't like, no, literally, you can't even use purple here. So this chapter, unfortunately, ends in no win con scenario for either of them. Well, Sukuna, I'll make my own video talking about all the time Sukuna could have won earlier on in the battle, because there are some moments where he could have easily pulled out a dub if he really wanted to. But with that being the case, we go on to chapter 229. Now, this is where it gets a little itty-bitty hectic in terms of determining whether or not Satoru has a win con, especially considering this is one of the many chapters that comes with the famous Gojo win seal of approval from Shoko or Kusakabe or any of the adult characters. But we see Gojo and Sukuna, they begin a very intense, top, high-level battle between sorcerers of great skill. And then we see that, once again, we reach a neutral scenario. These neutral scenarios are very, very rough for Gojo to be argued a quick win con because of purple charge up time, because of red, because of blue. Though admittedly you could argue that he could just press the advantage here, but you can't because the domains are destroyed at the same time, meaning both of their brains are fatigued. And while, once again, the whole idea of not doing this, not engaging in another domain expansion battle, while I have my own thoughts about it, this very specifically seems like the only win con Gojo can go for at the time because he knows Sukuna's going to immediately open his domain as well. However, naturally, due to the gap here, Gojo seems to have the win con, right? But then Mahoraga comes out. Now, Mahoraga throws a massive, a gigantic, the wrench might as well be bigger than Ultimate Weapon. Do I grab it? I'm not going to rip it off the wall. Well, do I? Well, maybe not. But actually, no, I will, just because now, Sukuna's ultimate weapon, his ultimate weapon, if you will, Mahoraga has decided to join the battle. And this is where it gets interesting in terms of deciding whether or not Satoru has any win cons from this point. Because he does. But he doesn't use them for very specific reasons, however. So, let me put that bad boy right back down. And we have to talk about Mahoraga and how I would have to say, how do I put this? You ever seen someone that complicates a battle, but at the same time doesn't really complicate a battle? Because a person in a battle has a very specific answer that they could have used against this other person in the battle, but they don't use because they aren't thinking straight, or because of plot, or because of character writing, or stuff like that. That is Maharaga's inclusion in this battle. And let me tell you why. So, the big thing here, and I will go Gojo a pass for, even though it doesn't necessarily make much sense based on what's revealed later on, somehow Maharaga's able to move faster than Satoru here. This feels weird. Once again, it feels like not a plot-induced stupidity. Well, I guess it kind of is a plot-induced stupidity moment. It's something strange. For all intents and purposes, Mahoraga should not outpace Satoru here. He just shouldn't. He really shouldn't. But he is able to stab Unlimited Void. This is the reason I say this is so weird is because Gojo has his domain buff. Sure, he hasn't hit any black flashes yet, but he should be relatively locked in. He has the advanced perception of the sixth eye, so time should be flowing much slower for him. All that, yet Mahoraga is able to come out and pierce Unlimited Void before Gojo can activate a Curse Reversal Red. So, tough noogies on Gojo's part. And then this is a case where you could argue a win con for Chapter 229. You could just argue, well, he blasts Mahoraga away, and then Sukuna is stuck in Unlimited Void for however long Satoru decides to keep him in it. Simple as that. Relatively simple as that. And then Sukuna loses off of that alone. But it seems like I'll have to chalk this one up to the game. I'll have to chalk this one up to plot. And that Satoru could have just never won here because Mahoraga was meant to outspeed him and stab Unlimited Void in this moment. That's kind of just what I have to hold there. It feels weird. It feels weird, especially considering on the scaling that's highlighted later on in this fight, but it's fine. We're going to chalk this up to Mahoraga just being way too himothy. And naturally, with his automatic adaptation to Unlimited Void due to facing Unlimited Voids multiple times, we run into this. Now, I will admit, it also does feel kind of weird that this moment takes so long for Sukuna to for Gojo to realize that Maharaga's soul, or no, Megumi's soul is being used as a conduit for Mahoraga and not Sukuna. It does feel a little bit weird, a little bit inorganic that that's the case, but once again, I can chalk this one up to Gojo being focused on other things and not necessarily paying attention to all the information the Six Eyes are giving him. However, something that does feel a little bit strange here is that Gojo lets Sukuna put Mahoraga away. That feels a little bit strange. Especially considering, I know he's definitely caught off guard here. He's very, very caught off guard here. But I think legitimately while Maharaga's out and about, he should have healed his technique immediately and started blasting. Like, this is a hypothetical win con. Right here, right now, though it would be an extended win con. And you may be wondering what I mean. If he had started blasting, he picked up the Thor's hammer, which would be red in this scenario, and just boom, and just smacked Mahoraga in the face with it while he was still out, then Sukuna loses. It would be a very long battle after the fact. but he would lose. The main reason I say it'd be a very long battle after the fact is because by this point, even with technique recovery, we can see that Gojo has hit the brain damage point. So unfortunately, by the time of 230, Unlimited Void is a win con that is taken strictly off the table. It's just gone. So unfortunately, this cannot be brought up again. We don't know if even Sukuna now, at this point, after restoring his flesh, can now use Domain again. We just don't know yet. We may see in the next couple chapters or so. But for this case, Domain is taken off the table by this point. But Maharag is the big issue here. If Gojo wanted to win, he just needed to boom, hit it with a red. Right here, right now. Maybe you can argue that due to what's revealed of Satoru and Maharag's interaction with Red post-brain damage, after Maharaga does some more adapting to the Limitless technique, maybe it would have worked out. But I do think right here, right now, if he had blasted Maharaga with the Red, erased the Shikigami from existence, that's it. That's it. Or if you don't like the Red idea, if he thought of Unlimited Hollow earlier and just clapped a Red and a Blue together in his hands before Maharaga could be put away, Maharaga would be atomized and Sukuna would never be able to get a win con of the Spatial Slash. Maybe never is a harsh word, but I do think Satoru would end up putting Sukuna down, burning him out of his Curse Danger Reserves before Sukuna could figure out to expand the target of his Curse Technique on his own. At least in my opinion. And thusly, this is another hypothetical win con scenario, despite it seeming so dire for Satoru. But he takes so much time thinking about what happened that Sukuna is more than capable of putting Maharaga away way too soon. Then we had the whole Domain interaction, and naturally with Satoru on the ground for the majority of this chapter, there doesn't seem like there's another win con here. But then Sukuna's Domain breaks, and it's revealed that his brain damage is enough to harm Sukuna. This admittedly does feel like a weird point. I will bring this up. I mentioned this in my review for chapter 230, but I'll bring it up here again. Even though Maharaga's immune, it doesn't necessarily make sense for Sukuna to magically recover and then be affected by Limited Void's brain damage after the fact. That is a very weird moment. I'm not sure technically, ironically, even with Maharaga showing up here, Gojo should have won at this very point because Sukuna was affected by Limited Void and he should have been paralyzed for longer, but whatever. Well, once again, I keep saying we have to chalk this up to the game, but I'm chalking it up to the game on this one. For some reason, Unlimited Void had delayed effects that only appeared once Sukuna attempted to open Domain, even though that's not how Unlimited Void seemed to work at all. I don't know. Weird stuff. This fight is full of weird stuff. I'm probably going to do a whole video breaking down the weird stuff in this fight, because there's a bunch of weird things on both ends. Not just for like things against Gojo, but things against Sukuna. This fight is full of weird things. But with that being the case, they're put on equal playing fields once again, and we get the iconic panel of Gojo just say smacking the taste out of Sukuna's mouth. But this is where we enter another very, very interesting point, which has a whole bunch of win cons for the strongest sorcerer of the modern day. Let's hop to chapter 231. I hate to call Satoru an idiot here, but he is kind of stupid. But this is something that only comes in retrospect. Maybe you could argue Satoru knows something that we don't. But considering we do see the wheel destroyed by a wildly rampaging Hollow Purple, realize that at this moment, from this point on until he ends up getting got by Maharaga appearing fully adapted, he could have charged a purple right in Sukuna's face and Sukuna could do nothing about it. You realize that, right? Like, this whole chapter where he does all this crazy extra fancy stuff. There is literally no reason for this man to not charge a purple. And then if that first one don't work, another purple. Then that next one don't work, another purple. And just another purple, another. And the reason I say this is because we know the wheel is vulnerable to purpleization. This sounds so stupid. But literally, it is vulnerable to purpleization. Where you see that he's more than willing to use blues and reds throughout this battle. But ultimately, that just ends up adapting Sukuna for Sukuna. That sounds so stupid, adapting Sukuna for Sukuna. But it is true. That's what he ends up doing. If he had just unlimited hollowed sooner, the wheel would be atomized and Maharaga would be taken off the table. And thusly, Sukuna's easy path to adaptation would be taken off the table. And once again, with Domain not being an option for either of them, since Satoru still has the Infinity, that would naturally make Sukuna have to press him. But unless he presses him with Domain Implication, which would turn off the wheel, which would turn off any sort of adaptation. And we've already seen in their physical battles within domains, when they both have domain buffs, Sukuna's physical hits don't actually do much of anything to Gojo. Charging a purple in his face would have been a better option. That's an easy win con right there. Would have vaporized Maharaga's wheel, would have done a whole bunch of damage to Sukuna, would have worn Sukuna down and gotten rid of his only option to easily bypass the Infinity. That's it. This is all win con for here in 231, and unfortunately this pattern kind of continues for the next couple chapters. Engaging, I hate to, once again, I feel bad calling Satoru stupid, because obviously Satoru is a very smart character, one of the smartest in the series, but ultimately engaging with Sukuna in hand-to-hand combat here is dumb. It is. It is simply using blues, using reds, using anything but purple here is stupid when Sukuna has no way to directly press him that doesn't automatically turn off his own adaptation, and since Love on the Shrine is off the table. So charging purple right in Sukuna's face should have been the move. But, of course, that's the move for 231. There's no way this could continue anywhere else, right? Like, no way that this could continue into 232. Yeah, another thing right here, same win con as before. He could have just charged purple right in Sukuna's face. There's really no reason for him not to, especially with Sukuna continuously adapting to the current phenomena of red and blue. No reason for him to not just hit him with the purple. And you guys may be wondering, well, Sukuna could just dodge purple. Yeah, okay. Once again, Mr. Infinite Magic Meter over here. Let him try and dodge it. Let him slip up once. Let him make one mistake. And then he's vaporized. And his win con, the Maharaga thing spinning above his head, is also vaporized. Charge it in his face. Why not? And once again, since Gojo ends up coming up with Unlimited Hollow later on in this very fight, and it seems like it's something he has theorized about before based on how it's phrased at the end of 233, I don't know. It seems like it would be a more logical solution to whip that out versus not whipping it out. So we already had the idea of a ranged hollow purple. But we see, he hits the black flash on here. He gets Sukuna knocked out. Maharaga drops out, comes in, ends him. Once again, Gojo's already made the mistake of giving Maharaga a ton of adaptation fuel. Ultimately, this red, blues, everything that's already been adapted to by Maharaga. Thusly, I understand why those win cons are taken off the table for Maharaga in later chapters from this point on. Moving on to chapters such as 233. We already see that Maharaga has developed quite sturdilicious adaptations to not just the neutral limitless known as the Infinity, but also to things like red. Half due to Gojo's lowered output, half to, Maharaga already adapting. So there's realistically no real reason for Satoru to be engaging with anything but purple. But it'd be like that when it be like that, especially when it be like that. So we see Sukuna summon Ahizo. And admittedly, Ahizo should have been immediately vaporized. I'm not going to lie to you. But it'd be like that when it be like that, especially when it be like that. He's being pressed by Sukuna and by Maharaga at the same time. So this kind of high-level scenario makes sense why he doesn't immediately use it. But admittedly, giving Maharaga more adaptation fuel by firing off a weakened red, not the smartest thing to do, at least not in my opinion. And note, the reason I say he knew about Unlimited Hollow before, or at least should have attempted it before, is because of this line right here. I'll have to finish this with Unlimited Hollow. This implies that he knew what it was, or at least he had some sort of idea of what it could be, and he knows the idea of just letting Hollow Purple fly loosely. He should have done that immediately. Because realize, if he had done that any earlier and vaporized Maharaga, once again, Sukuna's win con is off the table. Sukuna takes a whole bunch of damage and still can't get through the neutral limitless, and then boom, Gojo just keeps beaming him. Because now Maharaga, the adapter, is off the table. So that could have been it. And unfortunately, the same kind of win con scenario ends up happening for the rest of the chapters. If he had just been a little bit quicker, right after here, you can argue Gojo lost. Because Sukuna learned it. Sukuna got the DLC. He got the DLC. So right here in 234, you can definitely argue. After this point, all win cons are kind of irrelevant. Though, admittedly, he could have released Hollow Purple or Unlimited Hollow sooner. Because remember, he can just do blue and red at the same time. When he had two orbs, he could have just slammed the two orbs together and let out an Unlimited Hollow. But, of course, he does not do that. And we end up getting this fate. And then he unleashes Unlimited Hollow later. Right here. And I'll admit, technically this is a win con if it had worked. Maybe you could argue that if the blue was actually at full power and the chants were a little bit different. But then again, the azure is amped by Gojo's chants here. So this is a full power hollow purple for all intents and purposes. So this hollow purple, this unlimited hollow, if he had just released that sooner, he would have won because Maharag would have been vaporized. And then there's one final win con a friend of mine asked me to cover, even though I kind of think it's not really a win con, and it's here. You could just argue he should have seen the spark. He should have seen something, considering he's very specifically locked in at the end of this chapter, 4 black flashes and looking directly at Sukuna with the 6 eyes. He should have seen the flash, the spark of cursed energy, and been able to do something, been able to react at least somewhat to the spatial slash. And that's once again less of a win-con scenario. So overall, in my opinion, there were numerous chances that Satoru had to end this battle and win. Why they didn't happen, I'm going to chalk it up to character writing, I'm going to chalk it up to some plot, and I'm going to chalk it up to certain weird things in this battle. Do I think it's bad? Not necessarily. I understand why Gege had certain plot conveniences, had Gojo do things in very specific ways, and shoot, you're going to, once again, I'm going to make a very similar video for Sukuna where he could have won a couple different times throughout this very same battle. So don't be too shocked when that ends up dropping in your sub boxes. But yes, I do believe Gojo could have won here through manipulating the battlefield and manipulating his abilities in very specific ways against Sukuna. However, that's what I think. Please what you guys think in the comment section down below. Now, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, please leave. Nah, I'd win. In the comment section down below. I want to thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And make sure you hit that little notification bell so you do not miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do have a Patreon down below where you support for as low as $1 a month. Get things like exclusive videos, early content, and more. You also want to become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Some of those perks would include the live reaction to the next chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, I want to thank you guys so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is Dagger the Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our $3 members, Recliner Plays and Red Bull 4765. I'd like to give another thank you to our $5 patrons, Winter, Victor, Sean, Midnight Gem Lord, Kevin, and Demix LND. I'd like to give a hefty old thank you to our $10 patrons, Robbie Uchiha, Joaquin, and Idem Okami. I'd like to give another final thank you to our $25 member, Alex Ice Rose. And a final scrumdiddlyumptious gargantuan thank you to our $25 patrons, Igneal and Calvin Elder.